digressed heavily before we started the show, so welcome, Bucknutters. It is Thursday, August 3rd, 2017. I am Dan Rubin, joined, as always, on Thursdays by Steve Wiltfong, Director of Recruiting for 24/7 Sports, coming to you live on tape from Indianapolis. Steve, how's it looking over there in Indy?
Good morning, Daniel. I'm actually weaving through traffic here on 65 South on my way to the University of Louisville. Going to go see what's happening with the Cardinals today and, learn more about ball.
Louisville, a surprisingly big player on the college football scene last year with the Heisman Trophy winner and the very scrupulous Bobby Petrino. So that should be fun.
Louisville, I noticed I have nothing to do with this, but they have two 24/7 Sports composite five-star college players with Lamar Jackson, number 1. Their corner, Zaire Alexander, like number 21. They got a lockdown corner that also is a dynamic punt return guy.
Well, there's no question that program has taken a leap. Let's see how consistent they can be, and I wonder if they're just a one-man band or actually a super talented program. Although James Quick was a big player for them last year, the receiver who the Buckeyes wanted a bunch. So obviously if Louisville can lock down their native soil, they're in good shape.
I was going to say, things that interest me about recruiting. So Georgia took a bunch of in-state receivers last year. Louisville took 3 from Atlanta that obviously none of them were being pursued by Georgia. And I always am just like, who's going to end up, being the better evaluator? Like those guys could go to Louisville and end up being better than the guys Georgia took, and that's the difference between being a national title contender and just being your average run-of-the-mill program. If you're Ohio State, you got to make sure you take the best guys from your state, year in and year out, which they typically do. And I know there's more of those guys in Georgia and you can't keep them all home. But I just, Louisville took 3 guys from Atlanta, and that's just giving Bucknuts listeners a little insight to how my brain works. So it's like, I know those Georgia receivers were ranked higher, but I watched those Louisville receivers that they took, and those guys are damn good and could end up being better.
It's not just the evaluation, like you mentioned. It's how they develop the talent that have them on campus.
No question. In Ohio State, you got Mickey Marotti. You got an outstanding coaching staff. I saw a stat where in 2012, Rutgers defense gave up only like 12 points a game. And was Schiano the head coach back then in 2012? Or no?
He was not.
No. But those were his players.
I don't think.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
Were those his players?
I think by 2012 he either had moved on to the Buccaneers.
Right. Now he's your defensive coordinator in Columbus. And Kevin Wilson's your offensive coordinator. It's unbelievable. Kevin Wilson was a damn good coach. Indiana, you had to be ready to play the Hoosiers the last few years. And Ohio State knows that as well as anybody. Hell, they were, if Ezekiel Elliott wasn't on the field 2 years ago in Bloomington, that's a loss. And I know if my aunt had balls, she'd be my uncle, but it took that kind of player that day to beat the Hoosiers. So that's the kind of program Kevin Wilson had going. They weren't going to win 12, but they gave you hell for 12 games on their schedule.
So if you look back at the Big Ten and you're doing it by unit and you're saying, okay, over the last 10 years, or let's even break it down less than that, 5 or 6 years, what have been the best units? Besides, the Ohio State offense and defense obviously would rank up there, but off the top of my head, Michigan State's defense and Indiana's offense are the other 2 units that stick out to me. That makes sense to you?
Yeah, and Indiana, hell, they may have the best 1-2 punch at receiver in the conference this year. Those are guys Kevin Wilson recruited, So it's just unbelievable the staff that Ohio State has right now with Urban and Kevin Wilson and Coach Schiano, Larry Johnson, Tony Alford. It's just a ridiculously good coaching staff. Yeah, Billy Davis, exactly. People don't talk about him enough because of all the other guys.
Yeah, and it reminds me, recruiting-wise, actually, of basketball. Alabama and Ohio State. I know Alabama, people can go nuts about what's going on right now there in terms of recruiting. Shed no tears for Tricky Nick. But they've become like Duke and Kentucky in basketball, where they're recruiting, but they're really selecting.
I wrote an article yesterday on Oregon. Oregon's got like the number 5 class right now for 24/7 sports. They're starting to get in a situation where the line, Ohio State, Alabama, there's a few schools where the line's so long that you basically are drafting and doing less recruiting. And for years, that's what it's been like at Ohio State. For you take this kid, Juice Scruggs, who's announcing this week, who probably goes to Ohio State if the Buckeyes are pushing for him. Not probably. That's underselling it. But Ohio State's out there battling for Jackson Carman, Trey Hill, and William Barnes, you know.
It's probably more difficult to get those guys to come to campus just because they're more desired. But in terms of Ohio State creating their draft board, it's a Freudian slip there, their recruiting board, they're just ranking it 1 to 10, who's the best player in the country.
They're getting it right with their evaluation. When Ohio State puts together their board, they're better at it. They're self-scouting. They're evaluating of, when I say self-scouting, them going out and seeing kids themselves or getting them in their own camps, going down and seeing the kids self-eval, going down and seeing a kid go through a workout at their school or go through spring practice or whatever. Ohio State, they do a better job of making sure those guys are actually legit players that fit their culture than other schools. You know, that's the hardest thing in college football. There's so many good players. That's why, like, you look at Louisville. They find, you know, Bobby Petrino has never been able to recruit the Jims and Joeses that the Florida State Seminoles or the Ohio State Buckeyes can recruit. But there's so many good players. Making sure you're taking the right guys gives you a chance to win double-digit ball games every year. You know, Wisconsin does that. But Ohio State, they're in that conversation of being able to recruit whoever they want. But when you pick the right guys, it gives you a chance to win 14 games. And so that's, they're in position to do that every year because they don't screw up the evaluating part. And that's more than just saying this kid can play, then this kid can play and fit into what we're doing.
No question. The schools you mentioned too, Wisconsin and Louisville, they do it through an identity. Like, you know, at Louisville, it's going to be a Bobby Petrino offense, and that's kind of what's going to carry them. You know, at Wisconsin, they have a mentality of running the football and getting a bunch of big Wisconsin farm boys up front or other Midwesterners up front to clear the way. So
you have to make sure you can get those guys, though, that fit those offenses. And in Ohio State, you got to make sure you're getting guys that have the balls to come in and compete in your program, that they're not soft mentally. That's probably, you know, one of the bigger challenges for them. That's why you hear Urban Meyer talking about how he loves to see guys performing well in the state playoffs. Well, that's when their nuts have to get bigger. You know, that's when a kid is maybe feeling some pressure and that lump in his throat, and he goes out and balls anyway, you know. And so for Ohio State, it's more than just being a good football player, but being able to have the Jones to come in and compete with another alpha male or 3 other alphas in your position room, or even wait your turn and still bring it to practice every day so you're elevating your position room. So even though you're not showing up in the box score in the win over Alabama, you pushed the dudes that did, whether it was on the scout team. So finding guys that keep your culture sizzling is you're not consistently a title contender if you don't consistently recruit that way. So Ohio State's ceiling is higher than Wisconsin, but you still salute Wisconsin for consistently being in that realm because they don't miss often on the guys that help them stay in that air. And Ohio State's not missing on the guys that keep them in the national title discussion. If they started, you know, you see programs, I guess. USC, when's the last time their name's been mentioned as a national title contender? They should be breathing that air every year, but they're not. It's not easy to be a 14-game winning contender every year, but Ohio State has been since Urban Meyer's been hired, and it's because those guys recruit to an outstanding – they're not only recruiting outstanding players, but they're recruiting guys that bring the right heart and mental capacity to compete in the environment that they're creating.
They've added the extra piece to this that's so important in that they've proven that even if you do that, you will still get paid. For example, Curtis Samuel, if you look at Curtis relative to last year. He didn't touch the ball that much his first 3 years. Never whined, never complained, got his opportunity, and got paid. So these guys will be patient on the bench for a year or two.
That Ohio State recruited the right kind of guy, especially in today's culture where kids are transferring or they're all me guys, or it's all about them and getting to the league. And everybody, you definitely want a guy whose ambition is the league, but you also want a guy that's, when he comes to Ohio State, his number one mission while at Ohio State is to win a national championship, and everything else that comes with it is, hopefully the NFL and you get around those. I got a chance to talk to some of those Ohio State players at Friday Night Lights that were walking inside the shoe, and you just like the way they carry themselves, and it's an easy program to root for. They recruit well. You have an outstanding coaching staff. You have arguably the best college football coach in this generation. You have a chance to win 14 every year with that recipe.
The theme song was good today because this whole show has basically been a digression. But let's hit two relatively current events topics. One, there was some fear early in the week about Blue Smith, receiver out of Huber Heights, Ohio, going to be announcing in Wayne's second game of the year on TV as they go play Pine Richlands. I believe it's in Gibsonia in the greater Pittsburgh area. Then there was some news that he would not be announcing then. Now it seems he will. I have my mental crystal ball on Blue going to Ohio State. You still say Kentucky? How confident do you feel about that?
I'm not confident. I don't know. I haven't dug into that one in a couple weeks. I know he really likes Kentucky. Obviously, Ohio State doesn't miss very often for in-state guys they want. So as that decision gets closer, I'll dig back into it. But he was at Kentucky the week before he was at Ohio State. He enjoyed both visits. I think that Kentucky has really shown him how much of a priority he is throughout the whole process. I think for Ohio State, that's something that has picked up recently.
I'll just say this. Blue shan't be blue. Secondly, J.K. Dobbins, we talked about him a lot last year, even though he had suffered the knee injury as a senior. We talked about expectations as a freshman. One of the main names out of camp for us has been that of J.K. Dobbins. Not something you're surprised by, I would assume.
No, for two reasons. First of all, there's not much depth there, so there's a chance you or I could have gotten into the mix. It's kind of weird that Ohio State is thin at one position, but that's the one they're thin at. But you got Michael Weber back, and you're excited about him, and he's super tough. But J.K. Dobbins just has a different gear. He was the most athletic player in the country in last year's recruiting class. He rushed for so many yards as a sophomore and junior. He didn't have to rush for any as a senior for us to still talk about him. I mean, he rushed for damn near 3,000 yards as a junior, had over 2,000 as a sophomore, was a regular in the end zone. You could have sent all his college mail to the high school end zone because that's where he resided.
It's a good line right there.
He's terrific, and he's a blue-collar guy. He's an all-purpose back. He can catch the football. Ohio State has a lot of weapons on offense with DeMario McCall as a guy you can move around, and Paris Campbell can score anytime he touches it. McLaurin, my man from Indianapolis. J.K. Dobbins is another game changer when he has the football in his hands, and just another wrinkle for Kevin Wilson and company to flash for opposing defenses to have their knees shake.
Well, Bucknutters, if that digression-laden show doesn't make you optimistic about the team you root for, I don't know what we're doing here. We appreciate Steve stopping by. He'll be back next week. Have a good one, Bucknutters.
Thanks, guys. See ya.